With So Inspired by Bonnie with another Tuesday's tip. And today we're going to discuss what many of you had requested was regarding thread organization. So I'm going to go over here, excuse me, refresh the computer and see if we have anybody that's with us. And if you wouldn't mind giving me a hi or a like or some love so that I know you're here, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let me refresh this. While we're waiting for folks to show up, I did want to remind you that this post will be available as a replay on Facebook, on Pinterest, and on the YouTube channel. So if you're not with us live, you can find out the scoop on any of those channels later on. Please do sign up for our website, our newsletter, which is at our website, www.soinspiredbybonnie.com, and we'll give you a couple of freebies just for signing up, and we hand out what our specials are, or in any new releases, and periodically we send some freebies along with that as well. So today's subject is going to be thread organization. I know a lot of you requested that, and so we're going to cover it today. And I see that several are signing up. Hi guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I, like you, started many years ago, or maybe some of you have just started a few weeks ago. But I went shopping for thread and just picked out the colors that I loved. And what I found out is when I went home to play with my thread collection, or resource center as I like to call it, you know me well enough by now to know that I don't call it a stash because that seems to have guilt with it. So get rid of the guilt. It's a thread collection, or it's a thread resource center, and that takes away all the guilt. Anyway, and when I got home to sew with my threads, I wanted to sew some flowers, and I found out I didn't have any greens. So apparently green is not my color. It's not something I gravitate to, and you probably are the same way with some color out there. And you get home and you find out you need an army green for the flower, or you need that boring brown for the monkey. So what I did, as I said, was things have evolved over the years. Now I am a designer, so I have settled on one collection, and I have one of every thread in that collection. And I needed a way that I could find the threads, keep the numbers organized, and so I could find it and use it when I needed it. Now, you may not use all the ideas I'm going to throw at you today. You might use a combination of a few different ideas, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to give you a couple of ideas of what I have done. Feel free to change them up whatever way suits your way of doing things best. So we'll just start with this wall of thread here. Now this is one wall. I have another wall on the other side that's basically the same thing, where there's a pegboard and these little pegs that go in the pegboard. They're about 2 or 3 inches long. And I also have, let me pull a thread off here so you can see, I have key tags. And these key tags come in a package like this. Let me get it where you can see it. Key tags, and they come, I'm sure you've seen them around, with a little metal ring at the top. I simply took off the metal ring, wrote down the color number on the key tag, and then just slip that right on the little peg, and then I put the thread on that peg on my pegboard. That way I can keep track of what thread goes where to keep everything organized. And I don't throw things in a bucket because to me that makes it very difficult to keep up with tangled threads, and it's just hard to keep up with. So anyway, I also invested in a actual thread chart. Now this thread chart for Floriani has the actual thread colors. What I like about that is you can get them as a printout on a, from the printer, or you can get the actual thread sample colors. And I like the thread colors because you get a truer color that way. Printers don't always print out exact color matches, so it's not as precise. These normally run about 10 bucks. You can get them from your dealer. Simply ask them to special order it for you if they don't have it in stock, and I'm sure that they can get their hands on them. So they shouldn't be that hard to get a hold of, and there's thread charts for every manufacturer brand of thread out there. The other thing I've seen ladies do, which I thought was very ingenious, maybe you don't have one of every thread color, and I know some of you probably do, but not everybody has one of every thread color in a specific collection. What they would do is take their thread chart, and they might put a little dot or something next to the color number to let themselves or remind themselves that they already have that color in stock themselves at their house, so that they could only take this, or I should say they only needed to take the color chart with them and to the dealer or wherever they were shopping, and if they had a dot by it, they already knew that they had that color at home, so they didn't make duplicate purchases of the same color of thread. Now, how many of you have done that? I know I have, because our favorite threads, we gravitate towards those, and we have a tendency to pick up the same colors because we like those colors the best. So if you had something like this, where you could put a little dot or something next to the number, you would know when you go to your dealer that you don't need to get that particular color. So the thread charts are pretty handy, and you could do that even with the printed one. I just personally prefer the actual thread because it is a truer match to what the colors really are. Now, another thing I might add, how I organize these threads on my pegboard is I went by the same color order as what was in the thread chart. So if I'm looking and designing, I might look on my thread chart here to see, oh, I kind of like that color. Then I know approximately what row to be looking in to find that thread and pull out that particular thread. With everything numbered, it's very easy to get everything right back into place when I'm done sewing, so that next time I know, based on this, where those threads should be. Okay, now I know that a lot of you, let me get that folded up. I know a lot of you might be concerned about, well, gosh, this is out in the open air. What about sunlight? Things like that. The worst thing you can do for your thread is have direct sunlight on it. And this thread is not I don't have it next to an open window where direct sunlight could hit it. But that's the worst thing that could damage the threads. I do use my threads more frequently probably than a lot of people, so I'm in and out with them a lot. So there's not a lot of dust, but if there were to be some dust, I would just take my little Swifter and run it along it, and that would take care of it. Dust itself is not going to be harmful for your thread. You might not want to put your thread right under a draft where dust is coming down, because what the real concern with dust and thread is that the dust gets on the thread and then the dust gets into your machine. That seems to be the real concern when I've talked to different people in the know. It's not that the dust is harmful for the thread, it's more that the thread goes through the machine and there might be, residual from the dust getting into your machine. If that was a concern to you, but you still like this idea of having everything open and accessible, what I would recommend is getting yourself maybe some double-sided sticky tape, Velcro type, that you can just mount right above your pegboard. Make yourself like a little fabric curtain that you could put right over your threads so that they're protected from any sunlight or dust. Easy peasy, right? So that's a solution if you like having it open and accessible. Now another solution that I ran into was, like I said, years ago, I didn't have this pegboard system. I used what I know a lot of you used, which was the Matchbox car boxes. And this is what they look like. And what a Matchbox car garage box is pretty much what it says. You know, the little Matchbox cars, well, they used to make these little plastic garages for all those little Matchbox cars. These were carried at Walmart back in the day when I got them many years ago. I'm not positive if Walmart still carries them. I don't know if you can find them on Amazon.com, but I would probably Google it and, you know, Matchbox car garages and see what comes up with. But these hold the embroidery thread really nicely. I will forewarn you that they will not hold all brands of embroidery thread. My Floriani thread, for example, will not fit in these little slots. The little slots are about 1.5 inches wide, and if I measure the base of this, it's about 1 3/4 inches wide. So be aware of that. The Matchbox car is only going to allow a width of the thread for about 1.5 inches. But they're really handy, and if the thread that you use does fit in them, they're awesome because they have a little carrying handle. They carry 24 threads on one side, and they have 2 sides to them. I organized my thread by color, and it worked great for many years. I love this system. It's not quite as easily as accessible as having it out in the open, but you know, different things work better for different people. You know, whichever way works best for you is what I say. Don't fix what's not broken. I did go ahead and label this. You know, a lot of you know that I like to label things so that I have a place for everything and everything goes back in its place. And this is for my decorative threads, deco thread. It's my pearl crown in this particular section, which is a 6-weight thread. That's great for sergers or bobbin work. And then on the other side I have some 12-weight and 6-weight thread. But I do like to label it so that I can keep it organized. And I can know at a glance what it is in case I bought it and forgot. Because I went to sleep or something. And woke up the next day not remembering. Again, the labels are really, they come packaged similar to this. They're little vinyl labels, self-stick, and then I use the little bistro chalk marker to write whatever the contents are on the label. You can get the labels and the chalk markers at most any craft store. Okay, so I mentioned that the Matchbox car garages won't work for each and every size thread you have out there. So there's also your basic thread storage box. Now this one holds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 30. This one holds 30 spools, and this will accommodate the wider spools bases for your threads. So this works really well. I'm using this one because I had a project that's using a lot of threads, and so I actually use the little sticky, those little sticky pads that you have that are self-stick that, I'm having a brain fart now, can't remember what they're called, but the little sticky labels and put on there for what particular project or what section of the project, so that if I go and don't come back to this project for a couple of weeks, then I know where I was and where I left off and can keep my head straight. So you can use these to organize your projects or for storage. Either way, whatever works best for you. Now, one thing that I'm kind of anal about is when I put my thread away, and I do, maybe I'm OCD on this, I don't know, but I don't just put my thread away with the thread tail hanging, because with the thread tail hanging, you're definitely going to have knots and tangles and a mess to clean up. and it's a waste of time to clean up a whole big mess rather than just kind of take care of it as you put it away. I would say 95% of all thread has a little slit at one end or both ends of it. Sulky has it on either end. On the Sulky brand, you can just kind of pull it out. Robinson Anton is the same way. You can just sort of pull it out. Let me get a Robinson Anton here. This one is what I'm talking about. You just pull the end and it opens it up, and then you can wind your thread tail in that little slit, pop it closed, just squeeze it back, pop it closed, and that will seal those thread tails so they don't tangle. Isocord is the same way. Exquisite, Poly X40, same thing, you pull them apart. Sulky, same thing, pull them apart, and you can put that thread tail inside the little slit. Now the Floriani thread has a little slit down here. You don't have to take it apart, but if it does come apart, it's not broken, it just comes apart. But I find it easier to just leave it together and wind the thread tail around that little slit so it stays and it's not going to come apart, and then I can put it back in place and I don't have to worry about thread tails getting tangled in a big old mess. Okay, so we've gone over the wall, the Matchbox car garage, and the thread box. And I had a lady that wrote in, and I had to chuckle because, well, I'll tell you in a minute. She wrote in with her thread storage, which I thought was very, very clever. And what her husband did, they just finished redoing her sewing room, and she said, I could just live here because it's my happy place. And isn't that the truth? Our sewing rooms are our happy place. It's our place to escape. So it's nice to have them orderly and organized where we can find what we want when we want it. And I printed out a picture because I obviously don't have her thread cabinet here. But here's a picture of what he did for her. And what it is a kitchen cabinet. And he cut the kitchen cabinet down so that it's not as deep as a normal kitchen cabinet would be to accommodate dishes and things. But they cut it down and painted it. And then when you open up the doors, here's what you have inside. And so he's made these little angled shelves, and then he put little pegs on all the shelves, the little tiny shelves, to accommodate all her threads. So when she opens up the door, not only is the thread in the back, but the thread is also over here on the inside of the door. So that was very clever. When I saw this idea, though, I just cracked up laughing out loud. You know, I chuckled out loud because I thought, that's almost identical to what my husband built for me to store all my hoops. But what he did was he started from scratch, and he used Pegboard, and he built a box. And on the outside, and it's on the other side of the room where I would show you, but I had this upside down, I'm sorry. On the outside, he had Pegboard where the doors are, and then on the inside, my husband's idea had more pegboards. And I had to laugh, like I said, because I've been thinking about moving some of my thread to inside these boxes where all the pegboard is, because I could have a thread on the inside and thread on the outside, and or it would all be on the inside of the cabinet, but on the pegboard. So if you don't have a husband that's built you all these little shelves, you can kind of do the same thing with pegboard and have a box and use the little pegs like I used here. So there's a lot of different ideas out there. There's probably as many different ideas and ways to store thread as there are colors in the rainbow. So there's all kinds of ideas out there. I've seen people put thread not on a cabinet, but on a computer drawer that slides out. Some people, like myself, use a computer desk for their sewing machines and embroidery, and then they have these drawers. Well, this lady put her little tees for golf tees, and she glued those on the inside of the sliding drawer and then put her thread on top of that, which I thought was really clever. And I don't see why you still couldn't use the key tags in that method if you wanted to. So that's what I'm saying. You can kind of combine some ideas. Now, the lady that gave us that tip with her husband building or modifying a kitchen cabinet, I should say, the idea came from Lois Van Akron. I think I'm saying her name correctly, Lois Van Akron. And since I'm using her tip on our Tuesday's tip segment, I'm going to send her 5 half sheets of super sparkly glitter flecks. And as you all know, we have the glitter flecks available on our website, well over 50 colors. But that's pretty much in a nutshell how I store my embroidery thread or some of my specialty threads. You could use the Pegboard system for your specialty threads too. Whatever works. So I'm going to go to the computer and see if we have some questions that we can answer and get you taken care of here. Lois? Oh, Lois, you're welcome. I didn't know you were here today. Great to see you here. Yes, you're most welcome. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. Teresa Words has asked a question. She said, where did you find the under cabinet lighting over your thread? I'm sure my husband found that at Home Depot or Home Depot or Lowe's. That seems to be his 2 favorite places to shop for any DIY projects. And my husband did that. I can't take credit, but I'm sure that's one of those 2 places is where he found it. They have lots of options. Let's see. Anna wrote, I need more thread. We all need more thread. I don't think you can have too much thread. It's kind of like fabric, isn't it? Can you have too much? Nah. Not. You have to have lots for your resource center. Angie said, Bonnie, when you are sitting and doing an embroidery, how do you manage your threads? I seem to have them sitting all over the counter next to my machine. That's a very good question. I have a method to my madness. What I do when I'm sitting doing embroidery is I print out my color sheet that comes, any digitizer should include a color sheet with their designs. So that's the first thing I do is I print out my color sheet. And then I pull out the numbers that are on that color sheet, if I'm following their colors. If I'm picking out my own, then I, can kind of skip that step. But say this orange is the first color, and say this purple is the second color, and, this pink or what have you. I put my thread next to my machine, to the left of me generally. It depends on which machine I am at. But I'll put my threads in the same order that they're supposed to stitch out next to me. And then if I have a color that repeats, I will put some sort of spacer, whatever I have handy. Do I have a ruler handy? I'll put that as a spacer. Do I have a pen handy? I'll put that as a spacer. And that tells me, that space tells me that, one of these colors is repeating, so I need to stop and look what color's repeating and use that one. So it's just sort of a stop and look thing to have a spacer, and then I'll put the other colors in line. As I've used my color on the machine, now I have a single head, not a single head, obviously it's a single head, but it's a single needle machine, it's not a multi-needle machine. But I think I could do something very similar with a multi-needle. I would just have, the first so many colors up there on my machine and then the rest off to the side. Once I'm done with that color over here, once it's stitched out and it comes off of my machine and goes on the other side of the machine. If it's a color that I need to repeat again, then I put it back in the slot where it goes, where I had the spacer. And then if I needed the spacer somewhere else, I'll move it. But I generally lay all the colors out in a row so it's very organized before I start my embroidery. And then as I do the colors one by one, they go off onto the other side of my machine out of the way. Because when I first started embroidery, I have a confession, sometimes I would come up with green hair or purple eyes or something that was totally out of whack and not intended, because I too used to have the thread every which way. So once I had that little habit developed, that's just how I do. Maybe again, I'm a little OCD, but it works for me. So, and it's really quite easy. So give it a try. See how it works for you. Okay, let's see. Anna says, that's how I do mine while stitching. I usually put the color chart up on the computer, though, as they sit close. That's a great idea, Anna. I like that, where you can visually see your thread chart. Yeah, I have mine pretty close by, but I don't have my computer in here. But that would be really handy. If you had it on your computer, you could just have it right there where you could see it. So that's a great tip. Karen asks, what are the best threads for embroidery? Gosh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? I think everybody has their favorites. I'm one of those that I go more for color. I've been very successful with just about every brand out there. I haven't found an embroidery thread that that my machines don't like. A lot of it has to do more so with how the machine is threaded. Is it threaded properly? I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but this is so true. More of it has to do with, is the machine threaded properly? Are you using the correct bobbin thread or bobbin case, or size bobbin even? A lot of those issues come up and cause problems more so than the thread actually being the problem. And there's a lot of good brands out there that make a high quality thread. So I just chose the Floriani, really truthfully, because I heard so many of you like the Floriani thread, and I wanted to give my customers what they like. So that's when I started using the Floriani thread and having the thread charts to match, because there were so many of you that really liked that particular thread. So, but I've used the Poly X40, the Madeira, Marathon, Robinson Anton, Sulky, and all with really good results. I will say that the Sulky's probably been my least favorite, and that's really because of the spool itself, not because of the thread. The thread's fine, but when it gets way down to the very end of those thread spools, they have a tendency to want to kind of snag and get caught, and it just takes a little bit more what's the word, a little bit more care, so that a little bit, I don't want to say work, because I don't feel like the sewing room is work, but a little more care and a little bit of a watchful eye to make sure it goes through properly. Okay, let's see what else we have. Oh, Terrell says she's having internet issues and keeps going offline, but she sure enjoys our shows. No problems. If your internet's failing right now, we will have replays, so don't worry about that. You catch us when you can. We've all had those issues. I've even had those issues when I was trying to do the Tuesdays tip, so I feel your pain. Donna says, I have trouble with the metallics on my faff. Also Madeira. Okay, I have a feeling I know on the Madeira what the problem is. I did this in another Tuesday's tip. The Madeira thread, a lot of it is, I can use this over here. The Madeira thread a lot of times has no end cap on the spool itself. It's kind of just on a little tube. And what I like to use with the Madeira thread is a serger sponge. And if you can't locate these serger sponges, just take a sponge and cut a little tiny hole in the center, and that'll work just as well. But you put the thread into the you put the sponge, let me start over. You put the sponge on a vertical thread stand, put the Madeira thread in the serger sponge on the thread stand, and you shouldn't have any more issues with that Madeira thread. This one, you can also use the Madeira thread with the teeny tiny, I don't have the spool cap, but the little spool cap actually goes inside. It's on the Brother Baby Lock machines. It's a little gray spool cap, very small. It actually fits inside, so there's no disc sticking out, because what happens when you have a disc sticking out, and I don't have one in front of me, but let me use a key ring here, not a key ring, but a key tag as an example. When you have, say, your end cap, pretend this is an end cap to your machine. When you have that, do you see the space that is created between the thread and the spool cap? What happens is the thread can get caught and kind of puddle around there, and it won't feed, and then if it's not feeding, you're going to have needle breaks. So that can be a problem, but doing something like this and going vertical will solve that problem. Or putting the teeny tiny spool cap on the end to go horizontal will solve that problem as well with the Madeira. And as far as metallic threads go, I highly recommend, now this I do have a preference on the metallic threads, and I know everybody does, but I really swear by King Star metallic threads. A place called the Embroidery Store sells it online. I sew at 1,000 stitches a minute plus with the metallic thread. I don't change my embroidery needle from my standard 7511, and it just, I let her rip and it just goes. It sews it beautifully. So I would highly recommend you getting your hand on some King Star metallic thread, and I think you will be ecstatic. When we first found out about this particular thread, a lady from Australia came over to my dealership and told my dealer about it, and she tested it, because she's one of those that likes to test it, and she tested it on a lace bowl, and she said, I only had one thread break, and that was my own darn fault. It wasn't the threads, and she was ecstatic with the threads. So I highly recommend that, and the place online you can get it is called the Embroidery Store. Angie says the little gray spool cap inserts into the end of the spool. Yes, it inserts in, and there's really no flat edge. It's just like you'll see, it's really smooth, so it just is a little extension, but it's not gonna hang up, so it works beautifully. Let's see if we have any other questions. I'm going to refresh my page just to make sure, because I don't want to forget anybody. I know sometimes it rolls over and I can't get to the questions, but I think we have answered everyone's questions. So it was great seeing everyone. I really appreciate you guys spending a little bit of your time with me and letting us share ideas with one another. I know everybody's busy out there, and I really feel honored that you give up some of your day to come into my sewing room and share some tips, and we all learn from each other. So I appreciate it. Just wanted you to know that. And until next Tuesday, if you have any ideas or suggestions or questions, feel free to put the questions on the video here, under the video I should say, and I will, kind of watch it and try to answer any questions I can. If you have some suggestions, please send those to Bonnie at sewinspiredbybonnie.com. And who knows, maybe I will use your suggestion on a future Tuesday's tip. So until then, have a great sewing week, and we will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye for now.